Café with Cavanha brings today the topic coronavirus and the global supply chain with professors Dale Rogers, business at Arizona State University, Zachary Rogers, Colorado State University, Stephen Carnovale, Rochester Institute of Technology. Good morning, professors. Thank you for the participation in this café.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Crazy morning to be with you, isn't it?
Yeah, crazy.
Yeah.
Worldwide crazy, not only in Brazil, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, they had to pause the trading on the stock market on the way in.
Yes, they did. Within what,
Yeah,
the first
yeah.
10 minutes, was it? Chaos.
Yeah.
Impressive. Let me start with Dale, please. How big the impact of coronavirus can be in the supply chain, and can we measure this impact?
Well, we can't measure it, so there's like a delay, and in fact, there's a new Harvard Business Review article coming out pretty soon with me and Tom Choi and Bindi Vakil. Bindi owns Resolink, which is a risk management company, and we have this idea about the rule of 3 months. So from the time of the events upstream in the supply chain to where you really feel the impact is about 3 months. So the problem is there's already stuff. It's kind of like a star. You know, the light we're seeing from the star is from 1 million years ago, but that light is already coming, but we can't see the light that's actually being shown from the star right now. We see the one from 1 million years ago, and we're seeing this like 3 months delay, and it's really interesting. So the Port of LA, which is the largest U.S. port, Cavanha, as you know, the Port of LA on Thursday, normally they would have 10 to 12 ships in port unloading. Most of those ships would be from China, and they had 4 in port unloading. So, you know, you can pick 10 or 12 as what's normal. If it's 12 ships, then we're down, you know, to being a third of what the volume coming into the U.S. And here's the thing, you know, most everything that we wear, that, you know, any electronics, everything in the United States we use is mostly touched by China. And so the flow has been turned down to a trickle, and it's really on top of the dumb trade war that Trump got us into. You know, fourth quarter, Port of LA was down, volume was down about 15%. That's before the coronavirus, just because of the trade war. As of last week, it was down 16%. You can probably expect that we're headed by the end of March to 25, 35, maybe even 40% decline. And so that's a huge kind of a bullwhip effect where we're going to see just an inability to make things. Stuff's not going to be for sale. You know, I think Zach has a story about pharmaceuticals, actually. We're just seeing the very beginning of this, and it's going to be much, much worse.
Yeah, pharmaceutical research. So I know some people who work in the pharmaceutical industry, and they were talking to me about.
He might be married to him.
It could be, yeah, possibly. And so she was talking about they have studies being delayed right now. So not even just, you know, new drugs, but, you know, things that because the manufacturing process happens in China for so many of these drugs. So, you know, designed in the U.S. by Johnson & Johnson, whoever. And then they'll, you know, have to be tested before they can be put into the market. And right now they can't manufacture the drugs to the scale that they need to run clinical research. And so not only are we having, issues with, okay, can we come up with a coronavirus vaccine or all this other stuff, it's actually now having an impact on vaccines and drugs for totally unrelated diseases because the supply chain exists somewhere where the infection is pretty bad.
Yeah, Bindia Vitel tells me that just in the Wuhan area for the tech industry, there's 12,000 suppliers clustered there that they have mapped, and then there's probably a few more thousand that they don't have mapped. And all of those suppliers have been impacted. Well, I mean, it's Wuhan, so much impacted by the virus, and we're really seeing this roll through the economy. And you and I've talked about before. We're in this time of decoupling, which isn't really possible, but politically is attractive to people when it doesn't seem like it should be. But from a supply chain point of view, there's no way we can truly decouple without disastrous effect. And isn't it interesting that your sort of alma mater, Petrobras, is way down this morning because of partially impacts of the coronavirus and then the Russia stuff and we really are in this connected world, whether political leaders will acknowledge that or not.
Yeah, it's the frustrating thing when people are like, oh, we're going to move a Foxconn factory to Wisconsin and we're going to build phones here. It's like, okay, yeah, but all the components that we're going to use for those phones are still going to come from China. So we're just going to move the last step.
And they're not really.
No, they're not. It's not even going to happen.
Really build in the.
But even in the best case scenario for that plant, it was just the last step was going to get moved. People kind of don't see that. It's really a multi-step process. Cavanha, you were talking about can we see the effects of the coronavirus, and I think although we can't necessarily predict, I do have a data point I'd like to show you. And so here, let me share my screen with you here. So this is, and Stephen will recognize this, this is from this month's Logistics Managers Index report. So that just came out. So the first Tuesday of every month, we release this report, and it's a survey of between 1 to 200 director level and above folks at supply chain and logistics companies, and really a number of places. And we asked them, okay, these 8 metrics: transportation prices, utilization capacity, warehouse prices, utilization capacity, inventory costs, inventory levels, are they going up or are they going down? And it's just like the PMI, where any number over 50 indicates growth, any number below 50 indicates decline. And this month, for the first time, we broke it up into upstream and downstream respondents. So downstream respondents would be customer facing, so like retailers, other customer facing companies, and that's in the blue here. Upstream would be like manufacturers, 3PLs, shipping companies, things like that. And so you would expect, and that's in orange, and so you would expect that upstream companies are seeing the impacts of the coronavirus first because it's further up the supply chain, going back to your kind of rule of 3 months. And if you look at our results, that kind of bears this out. So if you look at inventory levels grew in February for downstream companies. For upstream firms, they contracted. Same with transportation price and transportation utilization. So transportation prices were going down for upstream companies because the demand is lower. Just like we saw with the 4 ships in the port of LA, there's not a big demand right now to be shipping stuff across the water. But we do actually see a growth domestically with trucks because, we're still delivering things from stores. So just like we were saying, that trickle down probably hasn't hit us yet downstream. The last one I would want to direct you and your listeners or viewers to would be transportation utilization. So transportation utilization is a metric showing of the available capacity, how much of it are we actually using? And huge growth in transportation utilization downstream, contraction upstream. So upstream, what we're seeing is inventory levels are down, and because inventory levels are down, demand for transportation is lower, which is also driving down transportation costs. And that's a totally separate thing than what we're seeing upstream. And so I think, if this is coronavirus, and I have reason to think this is coronavirus because most of these results were taken in the last week of February. We're kind of seeing it upstream now, and maybe we'll see it downstream in March or April.
Yeah, it's gonna get worse. And it's interesting, Cavanha. So a purchasing manager's index is sort of similar to what we're doing with the logistics manager's index, and the Chinese PMI this month is 40. So anything below 50, as I said, is a declining. That's the lowest level they've ever had. Mm-hmm. And I mean, you think about the growth in Chinese GDP. It's always around 6-7%. This is measuring upstream, but this shows a huge change. And again, that change is going to roll through the global economy. So China is the manufacturing base for the whole world, truthfully. I mean, Brazil does a lot of their own manufacturing, but a lot of the components come from China. And so you're going to see this roll through the global economy, and it's going to be drastic and dramatic.
Interesting. Stephen, considering those things that Zach and Dale brought to us, the entire supply chain from the source, nowadays China is manufacturing everything in this case, and the application, I mean the sales in several countries, which parts more affected in the beginning and which ones will be in the next time?
I've been thinking about this, and I was listening to the conversation. My academic work is all in networks and risk management in supply chains. And one of the most interesting things that I've been following is this whole concentration in Wuhan. I think Dale made mention to the number of 12,000 tech companies in that particular area. And so you can even generalize it up. I mean, the density, the co-location that exists with manufacturing, with shipping, the concentrated pockets around the globe that perform the things that we rely on, that produce the things that we rely on, that concentration leads itself to an immense amount of risk when a disruption like this happens. And so, the ripple effect is what we refer to it as in the risk management literature. The ripple effect is a lot like the bullwhip effect, which we all know about, except in this case, I think it's just so much more exacerbated given how rapidly it spread. And the interesting thing too, the other thing that I've been thinking about as it relates to this virus, it's almost, and not necessarily the case, but it's almost that the virus itself or the sickness isn't really the concern. People are now working post hoc to figure out how to curb the spread. And with that, there's this multiplicative chaos that's happening. And, Northern Italy was just quarantined over the weekend. Something like 17 million people are now effectively under martial law. So where it's going to impact, I think, the easiest thing to see about is the shortages of supplies, because everything, either finished goods or components, are manufactured in these areas in China. You're going to see the shortages start to occur. But then as the ripple continues, I think the complexity of how we're going to kind of rearrange the networks is going to be really challenging. And the other thing that I wanted to mention that I was thinking about during this whole discussion, back in 2017, we wrote a paper breaking down the types of risks, and we were looking at intentional disruptions. But I'm actually going to share, I'm going to pull a Zach, and I'm going to share my screen. I've got this paper up here for 1 second. So,
sure.
Okay. So here, if you can see, this is part from the paper. We were looking at something entirely different, but the application is clear here. So we looked at disruptions, and we looked at them from two different dimensions. We looked at them from either endogenous, meaning coming from inside the supply chain, or we looked at them from exogenous, coming from outside the supply chain as far as the location of the disruption. And then we looked at it from this context. We were looking at intentional disruptions. We were, at the time, we were motivated by a lot of the lawsuits that were occurring between Apple and Samsung, and they had this kind of tit for tat game that was occurring. But in this case, you can take a look at this 2x2, And you can see a lot of similarities that occur. Now, I'm not suggesting in any way that this virus was an intentional disruption. However, certainly if you're looking at it from a supply chain, this is an exogenous shock. This comes from outside the normal operating supply chain. And it's also a force majeure. It's a big natural disaster that impacts. And so those have certain implications. In addition, you can almost look at it basically on the L, right? So it's the inadvertent and exogenous. But for me, the thing why I keep thinking about this, why I think it's relevant is, you know, we teach best practices associated with procurement and purchasing, and we teach the best practices around stockpiling inventory and procuring certain quantities to get pricing discounts. But then we also say, well, you can't hold too much inventory because it's expensive. And what Zach showed about the LMI that we're working on kind of indicates that. But the thing that strikes me is that this pendulum of purchasing, it's going to rapidly shift back to, no, now we need to hold more inventory exactly because of these type of exogenous inadvertent disruptions. So it's a fascinating thing. You know, it's very cyclical. But for me, I've been viewing this thing from those two lenses. I've been viewing it from the way that that procurement and distribution networks are structured, as well as I've been looking at it from this ripple effect. And, you know, we've been studying how risk propagates and how risk spreads throughout the supply chain. And, you know, it's sad to say that a lot of the predictions in terms of the multiplicative impact of these things, they're definitely coming true. So it's,
and Stephen, to build on what you said, I think it's more than multiplicative. Maybe it could be exponential.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because and the three of us have talked about this before, but in the U.S. certainly the economy was mostly doing well because of the consumer. There's really sort of two economies. There's this consumer economy, and then there's the upstream supply base. And for example, September 2019 and December 2019, FedEx missed their earnings both quarters, and that is an indicator, along with several other things, that the upstream economy was already weakened. So we're seeing this incredible hit happen when the upstream economy was weakened, and because of the strength of the consumer economy in many places around the world, that was camouflaged. And so we really couldn't see that we were weakened already. And then this is, as Stephen was saying, is an exogenous shock that is probably exponential and is likely to truly expose and also really hit the consumer as well. Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking about one of Zach's brothers who's a waiter this morning. Is he going to be able to get paid and pay his rent? And
it's because it's in Kirkland, Washington.
Yeah,
right, which is pretty bad.
Yeah, and is he going to be able to pay his rent? And
are they experiencing the same type of quarantine that Northern Italy's doing? Because I was reading this, and basically regions in Northern Italy, they're not. Okay, so what they're doing there, if you haven't seen it, they're restricting.
So it's spreading like crazy because it's not. You're not seeing people in isolation or quarantine in the U.S. because it's an open society. In Brazil, you're not really seeing much quarantines yet because it's early and there's going to be this exposure that blows up. I was talking to a mutual friend of Cavanha's and mine, and I won't say his name, but he was saying, Dale, this isn't going to touch Brazil. We're the end of the world, man. And he was talking about the 2017, 18, 19 flu epidemic.
19.
Yeah, not 2000, right?
Yeah.
That was right. No, the 19, 17, 18, and 19, the flu epidemic. And it didn't really touch Brazil that much, even though 20 million people in the world died from that. because people weren't traveling too much to Brazil. Well, now there's incredible interaction between every continent. I think the only continent that doesn't have coronavirus cases is Antarctica right now. And so you are going to see this blow up pretty much everywhere, and it's going to have a dramatic effect in what's already a weakened upstream economy, partly because of global trade wars.
Yeah. Yeah, because and that's what we've been seeing with the LMI, because we look at both upstream and downstream. And so we've been a little higher than the PMI for the last few months because we haven't been separating out the manufacturing, which we did this month.
Right.
As
the PMI in every country where they do the purchasing managers index primarily concentrates on the upstream, and we have both elements of the consumer and the upstream in our logistics managers index, and as a result, ours has been higher, although you would expect ours is going to start plummeting.
Yeah, you would think that given where we look downstream. Even just to answer your question though about closing it down there, if you look at because they haven't closed down much yet. I mean, they're saying like, oh, stay home. And I actually got a note from Colorado State last night that said, hey, it's not essential travel. We are saying we advise you not to go, but they're not actually saying don't go yet. I mean, and that's really the difference. If you look at Italy will shut down northern Italy. China, we will quarantine cities. U.S., we're not sure if we're going to cancel Coachella yet or not. Yeah. We might. But, right. It's fun to have a concert outside. Yeah. So it's going to be slower here, I think.
And Zach, tell me something related to cyber attacks and the related failures. We are more vulnerable, or is this still the same?
So, I mean, if I was a cyber hacker right now, this might be a great time to launch an attack because everyone is kind of looking this way. And not over here. I mean, if, a year ago, maybe cybersecurity seemed like a much bigger priority to a lot of companies in terms of disruption than it does now. I mean, if we think about that little table that Steven showed us a minute ago, a lot of the cyber attacks fall into the inside job or the kind of targeted, outside attacks. Force majeure, though, which is what this is kind of overwhelming. I mean, it's difficult to focus on the smaller thing when you have this giant disruption going on. And so I wouldn't be surprised I'd be surprised to not see an increase in cyber attacks kind of during all of the chaos. I mean, it's sort of like, when there will be a natural disaster somewhere and suddenly you see people like looting stores to let's go get something while there's a flood. We're going to go.
That's a good comparison.
TV or whatever. I wouldn't be surprised to see the same sort of phenomenon happen.
Yeah. And the conclusions for this critical period, what can we suggest for people in terms of supply chain? Nothing to do or something to do?
Wash your hands.
What I think is that you have to really sort of look 3, 4, 5, 6 months into the future.
Yes.
And sort of think about what it's likely to be then, because to some extent that future's already been set to some extent, and you'll be better off if you can respond to it intelligently. Did you want to say something about that, Stephen?
Oh, no, I was going to joke to say wash your hands. I think that's good advice for us all.
Wash your hands. Don't take a cruise, I would say. I would avoid that.
Yeah, I think what I was going to say in reality, though, is to build off of what Dale was saying. That 3 to 6 month window is that exact propagation effect. And the thing that I would caution people in general who are doing planning around supply chains, be it production or inventory, for me, look outside the box in terms of where the disruption is going to come from. I think we'd be hard pressed to be able to pin exactly where the next causal mechanism that falls into play happens. But I also think if we pull back 6 months ago, it'd be really challenging to say that this type of a pandemic or an epidemic that might turn into a pandemic would cause that kind of an impact. So for me, it's just pull back and step outside the box, keep that radar on, and strap in because it's going to get worse.
Yeah. Now, one thing I would say in terms of prediction, so let's say this follows the normal course of a virus and it slows down in the summer months. I would imagine that we're going to see huge orders and a huge rush to production during the summer. And that'll be for two reasons. It'll kind of be the bullwhip effect. So we'll have all of this kind of backlogs and stock outs, and we don't have enough inventory. Probably at the beginning of the summer is really when we're going to see this tidal wave hit us, where we're out of stuff. And so then we have the summer, and let's say it slows down in the summer. So now there's going to be this furious production to catch up on everything, which could actually stress capacity on the other side. So now instead of we only have 4 boats, maybe we're seeing 16 boats in the port of LA because we're going to swing back in the other direction. Now, what could happen if this follows, Dad mentioned the Spanish flu epidemic from 100 years ago. If you look at what happened in 1918, it was really bad in the early part, the winter and spring of 1918. It went away in the summer, and then in the fall, it came back again. And in some ways, it was actually worse in the fall because the disease, it mutated a little bit. More people actually got sick in the fall. And so, I'm hoping that doesn't happen. I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm hoping that doesn't happen with coronavirus. But we could see this sort of trough that we're seeing now, spike in the summer, and then trough again in the fall and winter if we see the virus come back. And so I think
but the other thing that's likely to happen is, like with today is this giant drop in the stock market. In the early opening hours of the U.S. stock markets, it went to 7% drop, which activates circuit breakers, and we don't know if we'll see it down to 13%, which is the next level of circuit breakers. They take a pause for 15 minutes, but the impact of this is going to we're going to see bankruptcies just based on one day, probably the impact of this change in one day. And there, it's like a storm rolling in. It's like a slow moving thing where we're going to see some suppliers disappear. We're going to see restaurants closed. And as Stephen said, there's a multiplicative effect, which in this case might actually be exponential, I think. And so I don't know that things can come back in the summer. Maybe we'll see a slowdown in the flu cases, but we're going to see this ripple effect of the global economy decline through the rest of the year, probably because of events that have already been set in motion that maybe aren't totally realized yet.
And summer is coming to the US and winter is coming to Brazil in the next few months.
Right.
Although your winter isn't like a real
winter.
I mean, I'm I'm an Arizona guy, so I don't have real winter either, but I'm in Fort Collins, Colorado today. And actually, Steven's got the real winter. And
he has winter.
That's serious.
Strong winter.
It's 60 degrees today, so I'm not sure exactly if that's true anymore.
Okay, great. We appreciate having Professors Dale, Zach, and Steven with us today. It was a pleasure, this conversation.
Great to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day to all.